I've been a patrol officer with the Riverside Police Department for 12 years, and what I discovered at a yard sale on March 15, 2019, still makes my skin crawl. What started as a routine call about a neighbor dispute revealed something so disturbing that I had to transfer to a different beat just to avoid driving past that street. It was a gray Saturday morning, the kind where the overcast sky makes everything look washed out and depressing. I was driving Unit 23, a 2017 Ford Explorer Police Interceptor, when dispatch crackled through. Possible harassment complaint, 1247 Maple Avenue. Caller reports neighbors selling inappropriate items at yard sale. I figured it was another petty neighborhood squabble. Maybe someone was selling adult magazines or had prices too high. These calls usually resolved themselves with a polite conversation about community standards. Maple Avenue was one of those older residential streets where houses sat close together, built in the 1970s when privacy wasn't as much of a concern. Big windows, small yards, that suburban layout where everyone could see everyone else's business. The address belonged to a modest two-story house with beige siding, and sure enough, there were tables set up in the driveway with various items displayed. What caught my attention immediately wasn't the sale itself, but the organization. This wasn't your typical yard sale chaos. Everything was meticulously arranged, labeled, and categorized. Too organized. Almost clinical. I parked across the street and approached the complainant first, an elderly woman named Dorothy Chin who lived next door. She was standing on her front porch, arms crossed, clearly agitated. "Officer, thank God you're here," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "That man has been acting strange for months, and now this sale. You need to see what he's selling." "What exactly is the problem, ma'am?" "Pictures," she whispered, glancing toward the yard sale. "Pictures of people in the neighborhood. And other things. Personal things that shouldn't be for sale." The homeowner, a thin man in his mid-40s with graying hair and thick glasses, was arranging items on a table. He wore a cardigan sweater despite the mild weather and moved with nervous, precise movements. When he saw me approaching, he straightened up and attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, officer. I'm Martin Kellerman. Is there a problem?" "Just following up on a complaint, sir." "Mind if I take a look at what you're selling?" Of course. Everything's legitimate, I assure you." I started with the obvious items: old electronics, books, kitchen appliances. Normal yard sale fare. But as I moved between tables, the inventory became increasingly unsettling. One table had photo albums, but these weren't family pictures. They contained photographs of neighborhood residents in their daily routines, getting mail, working in gardens, walking dogs. The photos were taken with a telephoto lens from various angles, some clearly shot from inside Kellerman's house through windows. "Sir, can you explain these photographs?" Kellerman's nervous energy increased. "Oh, those. I'm something of an amateur photographer. I document the neighborhood, you know. Community activities. Did these people consent to being photographed? Well, they're in public view. There's no expectation of privacy in your own front yard, right?" Technically, he wasn't wrong about the legal aspect, but something felt deeply wrong. I continued examining the items while keeping an eye on Kellerman's behavior. Another table displayed what appeared to be personal schedules written on index cards. Names, addresses, work schedules, daily routines. Jennifer Martinez, leaves for work 7:15 a.m. weekdays, returns 6:30 p.m., walks dog at 9 p.m. Robert Thompson, gets newspaper in bathrobe, Tuesday garbage pickup, wife visits mother every Thursday. "Mr. Kellerman, what are these cards?" Research notes. I've been working on a neighborhood demographics project. Understanding patterns of community life. The most disturbing table was near the garage. It contained items that clearly didn't belong to Kellerman: a child's toy, women's jewelry, pieces of mail, a house key attached to a pink keychain, and small personal items that looked like they'd been taken from different properties. I picked up a piece of mail addressed to Sarah Williams at 1251 Maple Avenue, 2 houses down. "Sir, why do you have someone else's mail?" Kellerman's composure began cracking. That must have been delivered to my house by mistake. I kept meaning to return it. The envelope was dated 6 months ago and had been opened. And this key? I found that in my yard. Someone must have dropped it. I was reaching for my radio when Dorothy Chin appeared at my elbow. Officer, you need to see this, she whispered urgently, pointing to a small box on the ground near the garage. Inside the box were dozens of small electronic devices. USB drives, micro cameras, and what looked like audio recording equipment. Some of the cameras were still in packaging, others showed signs of use. Mr. Kellerman, I need you to explain this equipment. His nervous fidgeting intensified. I run a small security consulting business. Those are samples. For demonstrations. Demonstrations of what? Home security systems. Showing people vulnerabilities in their properties. I was examining one of the micro cameras when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were tiny pieces of adhesive tape attached to several devices, and under magnification, you could see paint chips and wood fragments, evidence they'd been attached to surfaces and then removed. Sir, I'm going to need you to stop this sale immediately. These items need to be examined as potential evidence. Evidence of what? I haven't done anything illegal. That's to be determined. I need to call for backup and a detective. As I reached for my radio, Kellerman made a mistake that revealed the true scope of his activities. Look, officer, I can explain everything. Yes, I've been monitoring the neighborhood, but it's for everyone's safety. I've documented suspicious activities, unusual visitors, pattern changes that could indicate criminal behavior. Without the residents' knowledge or consent, they didn't need to know. I was protecting them. By stealing their mail? Taking their property? I never stole anything. Those items were found. Blown into my yard, dropped, left unsecured. I was keeping them safe. Detective Sarah Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later with a crime scene technician. While I secured the scene and kept Kellerman under observation, they began cataloging the items. What we discovered over the next several hours was a comprehensive surveillance operation targeting the entire block. Kellerman had been systematically monitoring his neighbors for at least 2 years. The USB drives contained hundreds of photographs taken through windows, recordings of phone conversations captured by devices placed near property lines, and detailed logs of residents' daily activities. Some of the recording equipment had been planted in common areas, attached under mailboxes, hidden in landscaping near windows, placed in storm drains to capture conversations from adjacent properties. The man had created a network of surveillance devices throughout the neighborhood. The most disturbing discovery was a series of detailed floor plans for several houses, apparently drawn from observations made through windows during the day when residents were at work. He documented entry points, security systems, and valuable items visible from outside. Mr. Kellerman, Detective Rodriguez said, you're under arrest for stalking, possession of stolen property, and illegal surveillance. You have the right to remain silent. As we processed the scene, neighbors began emerging from their houses. Word travels fast in a community like this, and people were understandably shaken. Jennifer Martinez, whose mail we'd found, approached me with tears in her eyes. Officer, I've felt like someone was watching me for months. I changed my routines, installed new locks, even considered moving. I thought I was being paranoid. Your instincts were correct, ma'am. We'll need to interview you and the other affected residents. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded. Kellerman had detailed files on 14 households. He documented children's school schedules, noted when houses were empty, recorded personal conversations, and even tracked residents' relationships and visitors. The scariest part was his security consulting claim wasn't entirely fabricated. He'd identified genuine vulnerabilities in people's home security, unlocked doors, hidden spare keys, alarm system weaknesses. But instead of alerting residents, he'd documented these vulnerabilities for unknown purposes. We never determined his ultimate intent. Kellerman claimed he was providing an unrecognized community service. but the district attorney charged him with multiple felonies including stalking, burglary, illegal surveillance, and possession of stolen property. During the trial, we learned that Kellerman had been fired from a private security company 2 years earlier for inappropriate conduct involving client surveillance. His yard sale was apparently his way of disposing of evidence before moving to a new location. The most chilling detail came from his computer, which contained detailed profiles on each neighbor including work schedules, financial information gathered from stolen mail, family relationships, and what he called security vulnerabilities, essentially a burglar's guide to each house. I still drive past Maple Avenue occasionally, though I'm on a different beat now. Kellerman's house sold 6 months after his arrest, and most of the neighbors have upgraded their security systems. Dorothy Chin moved to a retirement community, saying she never felt safe there again. The case changed how I respond to minor neighbor complaints. What seems like petty harassment could be something much more sinister. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong about a neighbor's behavior, it probably is. What's the strangest thing you've noticed about your neighbors? Have you ever felt like someone was watching you or paying too much attention to your daily routine? I've been working retail loss prevention for Westfield Shopping Center for 8 years, but what I discovered at a weekend yard sale in Brookside still haunts me. What started as casual weekend browsing revealed a collection that shouldn't have existed, and memories that dozens of adults thought they'd lost forever. It was a drizzly Saturday morning in August 2021, and I was driving my personal vehicle, a 2014 Honda Civic, through the residential neighborhoods near work. Yard sales were my weekend hobby. You never know what treasures people are getting rid of, and after spending all week catching shoplifters, browsing other people's discarded items was oddly relaxing. The sale was at 847 Cedar Lane, a modest ranch house with an overgrown front yard. What caught my attention from the street was an enormous display of stuffed animals, specifically teddy bears, arranged on multiple tables under a pop-up canopy. There had to be over 100 of them, all meticulously organized by size and condition. The seller was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Hoffman, gray-haired with thick glasses and an overly eager smile. She wore a floral dress despite the cool weather and seemed unusually excited about potential customers. "Good morning! Aren't they beautiful?" she called out as I approached the bear display. "Each one has been carefully preserved. Perfect condition, most with their original tags." That's when I noticed something odd. These weren't typical yard sale teddy bears, old, worn, missing eyes or limbs. Every single one was in pristine condition, as if they'd been stored in protective environments for years. Some still had price tags from toy stores that had been out of business for decades. "Quite a collection," I said, picking up a particular bear that triggered something in my memory. It was caramel-colored with a red ribbon, about 12 inches tall, with a distinctive heart-shaped nose. "Where did you acquire all these?" "Oh, I've been collecting for years," Patricia said quickly. "Estate sales, thrift stores, online auctions. I specialize in vintage toys." I was examining the bear more closely when another customer approached, a woman in her 30s with 2 small children. She stopped dead when she saw the display. "Oh my God!" she whispered, picking up a purple bear with a music box inside. She wound the key and it played Brahms' lullaby. This looks exactly like my melody bear. I had one just like this when I was 7. Wonderful! That's a 1995 good musical bear, very rare," Patricia said enthusiastically. $50, but I might negotiate." The woman's expression changed from nostalgia to confusion. "No, I mean, this is my bear. Look, there's the small stain on the paw where I spilled grape juice. And this tiny tear in the ribbon that my mom sewed up." She showed Patricia the nearly invisible mend in the purple ribbon. "How do you have my childhood bear?" Patricia's demeanor shifted immediately. "I'm sure it just looks similar, dear. These mass-produced toys all look alike." But I was watching this interaction with professional interest, and the woman was right. The stain, the mended ribbon, even the way the music box mechanism sounded slightly off-key, these were signs of a specific bear with a specific history, not a generic collectible. Ma'am, where exactly did you say you lived as a child? I asked the customer. Here in Brookside. On Elm Street, just a few blocks away. We moved when I was 10, but I lived here from ages 5 to 10. I looked at Patricia, whose friendly expression had become noticeably strained. And you said you acquired these from estate sales? Various sources. I don't keep detailed records of every purchase. More customers were arriving, and I watched several similar interactions unfold. A man in his 40s found a bear identical to one he'd owned as a child, complete with a missing button eye that his grandmother had replaced with a mismatched one. A teenage girl discovered a bear that her mother swore was identical to one that had disappeared from their house during a move 15 years earlier. Each time, Patricia insisted they were simply similar-looking toys, but the customers were identifying specific, unique damage and modifications that proved these were their actual childhood possessions. I stepped away and called my supervisor, Detective Mike Torres with Brookside PD, who I'd worked with on several retail theft cases. Mike, I'm at a yard sale where I think someone might be selling stolen property. Specifically, toys that were taken from children's homes years ago. Stolen teddy bears? Are you serious? Dead serious. I've got multiple people identifying specific bears as their childhood toys that went missing years ago. The seller can't explain how she acquired them. 20 minutes later, Detective Torres arrived in an unmarked 2018 Nissan Altima. By then, the crowd had grown, and word was spreading through social media. More adults were arriving, many bringing their own parents or siblings to verify memories. What we discovered was unprecedented. Patricia Hoffman had been systematically stealing children's toys from homes throughout Brookside for over 20 years. She worked as a house cleaner and had used her access to client homes to selectively take toys that children had outgrown or temporarily forgotten about. Her method was sophisticated. She targeted toys that weren't actively being played with, often stored in closets, basements, or attic spaces. She'd take 1 or 2 items from each house over several visits, spacing the thefts so they wouldn't be immediately noticed. When children asked about missing toys, parents assumed they'd been misplaced, donated, or lost during moves. The children always moved on to new toys, Patricia explained during questioning. These were just sitting in storage, collecting dust. I gave them proper care, proper preservation. Detective Torres found detailed records in Patricia's house. She'd maintained a log of every toy taken, including the date, location, and child's name. Her basement contained hundreds more toys, not just teddy bears, but dolls, action figures, and games, all meticulously catalogued and preserved. The psychological profile suggested Patricia suffered from a hoarding disorder specifically focused on childhood items. She never had children of her own and had apparently rationalized the thefts as rescue operations for abandoned toys. The case exploded on local news. Over the following weeks, hundreds of adults contacted police to report toys they'd lost as children. Patricia's records helped reunite families with items they'd assumed were gone forever. The most heartbreaking cases involved toys with deep emotional significance, comfort items that had helped children through difficult times, gifts from deceased relatives, or bears that had traveled with military families through multiple moves. Sarah Martinez, the woman who'd found her Melody bear, told reporters, "I searched for this bear for 20 years. When my daughter was born, I wanted to give it to her. I thought my parents had thrown it away, and I resented them for it. Now I find out it was stolen." Patricia was charged with multiple counts of burglary and theft. The case revealed the vulnerability of trusting service workers in your home, and the long-term impact of what might seem like minor thefts. During sentencing, over 30 adults gave victim impact statements about toys they'd lost as children. The judge noted that while the monetary value was relatively small, the emotional damage was significant. Patricia received 5 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution. The toy reunification process took months. Some items were returned to their original owners, others to their children or grandchildren. A few toys couldn't be matched to specific owners and were donated to local children's charities. I still work retail security, but this case changed how I view property crimes. Something doesn't have to be expensive to be irreplaceable. The theft of a child's comfort object can cause lasting emotional harm that extends into adulthood. Have you ever had a childhood toy or comfort item mysteriously disappear? Looking back, do you think it might have been taken rather than lost? I'm Detective Lisa Chen with the Clearwater Police Department, and what I discovered during an estate sale investigation in September 2022 revealed a 20-year surveillance operation that nobody saw coming. The case still gives me chills when I think about how one man's obsession transformed an entire neighborhood into unwitting subjects of his art. The call came in on a Tuesday morning while I was patrolling in my 2019 Chevrolet Impala. Dispatch reported a possible stolen property complaint at 925 Hickory Lane. The Pemberton family was holding an estate sale for their recently deceased grandfather, Walter Pemberton, and multiple neighbors were claiming items being sold actually belonged to them. Walter had lived alone in the two-story Craftsman house for 30 years after his wife died of cancer. His 3 grandchildren, Kevin, Susan, and Michael, all now in their 30s, had driven down from Portland to liquidate his belongings before putting the property on the market. The complaint specifically focused on a collection of ceramic figurines the family was selling for $200 each. I arrived to find about 40 people clustered around several folding tables displaying hundreds of small ceramic figurines. Each piece was roughly 4 inches tall, incredibly detailed, and appeared to be handcrafted rather than mass-produced collectibles. The crowd was buzzing with confused, agitated conversations. "Officer, thank God you're here," said Margaret Foster, a woman in her 60s who lived across the street. She was holding a small ceramic figure and practically shaking with indignation. "They're selling figurines that look exactly like people in our neighborhood. This one here is my husband Tom, down to his reading glasses and his favorite St. Louis Cardinals jersey." Kevin Pemberton, a tall man with graying temples who appeared to be the family spokesperson, looked genuinely bewildered. "Officer, these are just my grandfather's art pieces. He was a sculptor, worked in his basement workshop for years. We assumed they were generic figures or maybe commissioned portraits from old friends. We had no idea they were supposed to be specific people." I took the figurine from Mrs. Foster and examined it closely. She was absolutely right. The detail was extraordinary and clearly specific. The ceramic figure captured not just physical appearance but precise clothing details, posture, and even subtle facial expressions. The Cardinals jersey had the correct logo, the reading glasses matched a specific style, and the figure's stance suggested someone settling into a favorite chair with a newspaper. "Mrs. Foster, how certain are you that this represents your husband specifically? Look at these details, officer. The small scar on his left hand from a woodworking accident 3 years ago. The way he holds his coffee mug with his pinky extended, it's a weird habit he's had since I've known him. Even the slight slouch in his shoulders when he's reading the sports section. Walter lived across from us for 20 years, but I had no idea he was studying us this closely." As I continued examining the display, more neighbors were making similar discoveries. Janet Williams from the house next door had found ceramic figures of her entire family, herself, her husband Robert, their teenage daughter Ashley, and their 8-year-old son Marcus. Even more unsettling, there was a perfect miniature of their golden retriever, Buddy, captured in his typical pose of begging for treats. "This is impossible," Janet whispered, holding the figure of her daughter. "Look, Ashley's wearing her volleyball uniform from Lincoln High School. She graduated 2 years ago, and this uniform was only worn during her senior season. How could he have known these details?" The Johnson family from 2 houses down had located figures representing 4 generations of their family, including elderly grandmother Dorothy, who only visited during holidays. The figure showed Dorothy in her signature floral dress and pearl necklace, even carrying the small black purse she always clutched during family gatherings. Kevin Pemberton was becoming increasingly disturbed as he witnessed these identifications. "I don't understand any of this." Grandpa Walter barely spoke to the neighbors. He was polite when he encountered people, but he kept to himself. After Grandma Rose died, he became even more reclusive. He'd work in his basement workshop for hours every day, but we thought he was just processing his grief through art. Did any of you ever see him working on these specific pieces? He always kept the workshop locked, Susan Pemberton added, stepping forward. She was Kevin's younger sister, a woman in her early 30s with concerned eyes. He said he needed complete privacy for his creative process, that interruptions would ruin his concentration. We respected that boundary. When we visited for holidays, he'd show us finished pieces occasionally, but we never thought to ask who they were supposed to represent. I requested immediate access to Walter's workshop to understand the scope of what we were dealing with. The family led me through the kitchen to a door that opened onto wooden stairs leading to the basement. What I found down there made my stomach turn. The basement had been converted into a professional-grade artist's studio. Hundreds more figurines lined custom-built shelves that covered every wall, meticulously organized by household and family groupings. Each shelf was labeled with street addresses. 1247 Hickory Lane Foster Family, 1251 Hickory Lane Williams Family, 1255 Hickory Lane Johnson Family. The organization continued for the entire block and extended to parts of adjacent streets. Walter's workshop contained professional sculpting equipment, multiple kilns for firing ceramics, an extensive collection of paints and finishing materials, and reference materials that made everything much more sinister. Mounted on the walls were dozens of photographs, clearly taken with telephoto lenses, showing neighbors and their daily routines. Pictures of people gardening, walking dogs, checking mail, playing with children in their backyards. But the most disturbing discovery was a series of composition notebooks, at least 20 of them, containing detailed behavioral observations of neighborhood residents written in Walter's meticulous handwriting. I opened one notebook randomly and found Subject: Thomas Foster, 1247 Hickory Lane. Daily routine: retrieves newspaper at 6:30 a.m. wearing blue terry cloth robe and brown leather slippers. Always drinks coffee from the blue ceramic mug with World's Best Dad inscription, while reading sports section first. Favors St. Louis Cardinals merchandise jersey rotation includes home white, away blue, and alternate red uniforms. Distinctive scar on left hand from workshop accident, confirmed through multiple yard work observations. Subscribes to Sports Illustrated and USA Today. Prefers to read standing on front porch rather than sitting. The level of detail was staggering and deeply invasive. Walter had been systematically documenting his neighbor's appearance, daily habits, personal preferences, and family dynamics for what appeared to be over 2 decades. Kevin, did your grandfather ever mention why he was creating these specific pieces? Never. He just said that art had become his passion after Grandma Rose died, that it gave him purpose and helped him feel connected to life again. We thought it was therapeutic, a healthy way for him to cope with loneliness and grief. He'd always been somewhat artistic, but the sculpting really took off after her funeral. The figurines weren't just portraits, they were behavioral studies capturing specific moments and characteristics. Mrs. Chin from down the street was depicted wearing her signature yellow gardening gloves, watering plants in the exact floral dress she wore most weekends. The Martinez children were shown in their school backpacks, positioned exactly as they stood waiting for the school bus each morning. Elderly Mr. Thompson was sculpted walking his beagle named Scout, following the precise route they took during their daily 7 a.m. constitutional around the neighborhood. Detective work over the following days revealed Walter Pemberton's background as a former high school art teacher who'd lost his position due to district budget cuts 22 years earlier. Neighbors consistently described him as polite but distant, someone who kept his window curtains drawn and rarely participated in community activities like block parties or holiday celebrations. The psychological consultation I requested suggested Walter suffered from severe social anxiety disorder combined with an obsessive need for human connection. Unable or unwilling to form normal neighborly relationships, he'd created an elaborate fantasy world where he intimately knew his neighbors through systematic observation and artistic recreation. His notebooks contain not just observational data, but imagined conversations, detailed family histories constructed from overheard fragments and visible evidence, and extensive speculation about residents' personal lives, relationships, and private struggles. He'd essentially constructed a parallel community where he served as the omniscient observer, knowing everyone's secrets without them knowing he existed. One particularly disturbing notebook entry read, "The Martinez family is experiencing financial stress. Robert's work truck hasn't moved from the driveway in 6 days, suggesting unemployment. Maria has been checking the mailbox multiple times daily, likely watching for benefit checks or job responses. The children's clothes show signs of extended wear, and grocery delivery frequency has decreased." Created figurines showing the family in their better times clothing to preserve their dignity. The legal situation was extraordinarily complex. While deeply disturbing, Walter's activities existed in a gray area of privacy law. He'd observed people from his own property using visual surveillance that wasn't technically illegal. Creating art based on observations of people in public view, even detailed, obsessive art wasn't clearly criminal behavior. However, the scope and duration of the surveillance raised serious concerns about stalking and harassment, even though Walter had never directly confronted or threatened any neighbors. The psychological impact on the community was significant, with many residents feeling profoundly violated by the discovery that their private family moments had been documented and recreated without their knowledge or consent. "It's like discovering someone had been watching us through a microscope for 20 years," said Sarah Williams, Janet's sister-in-law, who'd driven over when she heard about the discovery. "Every family barbecue, every argument in our backyard, every time our kids played outside or we worked in the garden. He was documenting all of it, creating permanent records of our most mundane moments. It feels like the most intimate violation imaginable." The estate sale was immediately suspended while we worked with the district attorney's office to determine the legal disposition of the figurines. The family was mortified by the revelations and fully cooperative with the investigation. They genuinely believed Walter was creating generic art as a hobby, never suspecting the obsessive surveillance operation he'd been conducting. Several neighbors filed formal complaints about feeling violated and demanded that their likenesses be destroyed. Others, strangely, were fascinated by the artistic quality and wanted to examine their figurines more closely. A few residents admitted to being oddly flattered by the attention to detail, even under these circumstances. "The craftsmanship is incredible," admitted Tom Foster, despite his wife's horror at the discovery. "He captured things about me that I didn't know anyone noticed. It's creepy as hell, but you have to respect the artistic skill involved." The investigation revealed that Walter had been operating his surveillance for approximately 23 years, beginning shortly after his wife's death. His notebooks showed an evolution from casual observation to systematic documentation to artistic recreation. The early entries were sporadic and general, but by the final years, he was maintaining detailed daily logs on over 40 neighborhood residents. Kevin Pemberton struggled with the implications for his family's understanding of their grandfather. "We thought we knew him. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering he seemed like a lonely but harmless old man who'd found peace in art after losing the love of his life. Now I discover he was secretly obsessed with everyone around him, living this elaborate fantasy life where he knew intimate details about people who didn't even know his name." The psychological profile suggested Walter's behavior represented a complex grief response combined with untreated mental health issues. Rather than seeking normal social connections after his wife's death, he'd retreated into voyeuristic observation that allowed him to feel connected to community life without the vulnerability of actual human interaction. Most of the figurines were eventually returned to the Pemberton estate and destroyed at the family's request, though a few neighbors chose to keep their representations as bizarre mementos. The photographs and notebooks were turned over to mental health researchers studying obsessive surveillance behavior, with all identifying information redacted. The case became a landmark study in privacy expectations within residential communities. Legal experts used it to discuss the boundaries between acceptable observation and invasive surveillance, particularly regarding artistic expression and mental health considerations. I still patrol the Hickory Lane area occasionally as part of my regular beat. The Pemberton house sold 6 months later to a young family with 2 small children who knew nothing about its history. The realtor was legally required to disclose the circumstances, but the new owners weren't deterred by what they considered an interesting but irrelevant footnote to the property's past. However, Longtime residents report that the discovery fundamentally changed the neighborhood's social dynamics. People are more conscious of their yard activities, more aware of who might be watching from behind those innocent-looking windows, and more protective of their family's privacy. Several residents installed privacy fences or security systems specifically because of Walter's legacy. The case profoundly changed how I think about privacy expectations in residential neighborhoods and the hidden lives of people we encounter daily. Someone can appear completely harmless, even pitiable, while conducting elaborate secret operations that violate every reasonable expectation of privacy and human decency. What disturbs me most is wondering how many other Walter Pembertons are out there lonely, obsessive individuals who found socially acceptable ways to intrude on their neighbors' lives. How many seemingly innocent hobbies are actually elaborate surveillance operations? How many quiet neighbors are secretly documenting our most private family moments? Have you ever discovered that someone was observing you more closely than you realized? Do you think your neighbors might know more about your daily routines and personal habits than you'd be comfortable with? What would you do if you found detailed records of your family's private life being kept by someone you barely knew? I'm Officer Marcus Thompson with the Pinehurst Police Department, and what happened at 432 Willow Court on October 14, 2023, revealed how a seemingly harmless yard sale became a psychological trap that exposed an entire neighborhood's buried secrets. What started as a simple fraud complaint uncovered years of manipulation, hoarding, and community-wide enabling that nobody wanted to acknowledge. The first complaint came in around 9:30 a.m. while I was patrolling the residential district in my 2020 Ford Police Interceptor utility. Dispatch reported a fraudulent yard sale, where the homeowner was advertising items for sale but refusing to actually complete any transactions with customers. Unit 47, multiple callers reporting the same address. Sounds like the seller is playing games with people trying to buy stuff. I'd been a patrol officer for 9 years and thought I'd seen every type of neighborhood dispute imaginable. Yard sale conflicts usually involved pricing disagreements or arguments over who saw an item first. This sounded different. When I arrived at Willow Court, I found approximately 25 frustrated people clustered around multiple tables displaying what appeared to be an impressive collection of antiques, electronics, household items, and personal belongings. Everything was clearly marked with reasonable, even attractive prices, but the atmosphere was tense rather than the typical browsing energy of a successful yard sale. The seller was a woman in her 70s named Dolores Finch, and she was standing guard over the merchandise like a museum security guard protecting priceless artifacts. She was thin with wild gray hair pulled back in an uneven ponytail, intense pale blue eyes behind thick bifocal glasses, and wore multiple layers of mismatched clothing despite the mild October weather. Her movements were quick and nervous as she constantly rearranged items that didn't need rearranging. "Officer, this woman is running some kind of elaborate scam," complained Robert Martinez, a middle-aged man in work clothes who was holding a vintage Zenith radio. "She puts out advertisements for a yard sale, sets out all this merchandise with clearly marked prices, but when you actually try to purchase something, she suddenly finds a dozen excuses why it's not really for sale. I tried to buy this coffee table 2 hours ago," added Linda Peterson, pointing to a solid oak piece marked $45. "She's given me 4 different stories about why I can't have it. First it belonged to her deceased mother, then she remembered it had termite damage, then she decided it was too valuable to sell, and finally she said I didn't seem like someone who would appreciate quality craftsmanship." Dolores Finch straightened up defensively when she heard the complaints. "There's absolutely no scam here, officer. I have every legal right to change my mind about selling my personal possessions. These people are being extremely aggressive and pushy about wanting to purchase items that have tremendous sentimental value to me and my family." I observed the dynamics for several minutes before intervening. Customers would approach various items, examine the clearly visible price tags, and attempt to initiate purchases. Dolores would then launch into elaborate, detailed explanations about why that particular piece couldn't actually be sold. It had belonged to her deceased mother, it possessed historical significance she just remembered, she'd suddenly recalled a family story that made it too precious to part with, or the potential buyer didn't seem like the right type of person to own such a meaningful object. Ma'am, if you don't actually intend to sell these items, why are you advertising and holding a yard sale? I never said I absolutely wouldn't sell anything, officer. I'm simply being very selective and thoughtful about who deserves to become the new owner of these precious, irreplaceable objects. Not everyone appreciates quality or understands the true value of beautiful things. The situation escalated significantly when a young couple, David and Jennifer Park, attempted to purchase a set of delicate china plates with a floral pattern, clearly marked at $25. Dolores refused the sale, claiming the plates were meant for someone who would truly understand and appreciate their superior craftsmanship and artistic value. When the Parks offered $50 for the set, assuming the marked price was negotiable, Dolores became visibly agitated and defensive. You think throwing more money at me will somehow change my mind about this decision? These plates aren't about monetary transactions, they're about finding the absolutely perfect home where they'll be treasured and respected for generations. I realized this wasn't a typical yard sale pricing dispute or seller's remorse situation. Dolores was using the yard sale format as a sophisticated mechanism to engage with neighbors and strangers, creating controlled social situations where she could manipulate interactions and maintain psychological power over other people. Mrs. Finch, have you actually completed any sales transactions today? I've had numerous meaningful, in-depth conversations with people about the fascinating history and cultural significance of various pieces in my collection. Not everything in life should be reduced to simple monetary transactions, officer. Over the next hour, I continued observing Dolores's behavioral patterns. She would engage potential buyers in lengthy, detailed conversations about each item's supposed history, her personal memories associated with it, and her strong opinions about whether they demonstrated sufficient worthiness for ownership. The yard sale was clearly an elaborate pretext for social interaction and psychological control rather than any genuine intent to sell merchandise. The items themselves told a disturbing story when examined closely. Mixed among what appeared to be legitimate household goods and personal belongings were numerous objects that clearly belonged to other people, pieces of mail addressed to various neighbors with different surnames, personal family photographs featuring people who obviously weren't related to Dolores, kitchen items with other people's names or initials etched or written on them, and children's toys that seemed inconsistent with an elderly woman living alone. Mrs. Finch, can you explain this family photo album? I held up a leather-bound collection of pictures clearly showing the Williams family from 3 houses down the street: birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school graduations, and vacation trips spanning several years. Oh, that particular album was accidentally left at my house by mistake during a neighborhood block party several years ago. I kept meaning to return it to the proper owners, but then I realized it might be absolutely perfect for someone who truly appreciates the importance and beauty of family memories and traditions. Margaret Williams, who had arrived after hearing about the commotion from other neighbors, immediately recognized her own family's photographs. Dolores, I've asked you about those pictures at least 6 different times over the past 3 years. Every time I brought it up, you kept saying you'd look around your house for them, but you never seemed to actually find them. I was carefully protecting and preserving them until I could find someone who would genuinely value and treasure family history the way it deserves to be valued. As more neighbors arrived and began examining the merchandise, a disturbing pattern emerged. The investigation revealed that Dolores had been systematically collecting items from neighbors throughout the community for many years. She wasn't exactly stealing in the traditional sense, but she was acquiring other people's possessions through manipulation, guilt tactics, elaborate emotional appeals, or simply keeping items that had been left, borrowed, or temporarily forgotten at her house. She borrowed my electric hedge trimmer 2 summers ago when her bushes were getting overgrown, said Tom Chun from across the street. Every single time I asked for it back, she had these elaborate, detailed excuses. It was broken and she was getting it repaired. She'd lent it to someone else, she couldn't find it in her garage. Now I can see it right there on her sale table with a $30 price tag. My 10-year-old daughter Emma left her bicycle here during a sleepover party about 5 years ago, added Sarah Rodriguez from down the block. Dolores kept insisting it was much safer stored in her garage than outside at our house, but she never actually allowed us to take it home. She'd always have some reason why next week would be better for pickup. I lent her a casserole dish after her husband's funeral, said elderly Helen Morrison. That was 8 years ago. Every time I mentioned it, she'd get tears in her eyes talking about how that dish reminded her of people's kindness during her time of grief. I felt too guilty to keep asking for it back. Dolores had essentially created an elaborate neighborhood collection system where she systematically accumulated other people's possessions through emotional manipulation, then used monthly yard sales as psychological theater to maintain control over these objects while engaging in complex social manipulation games. The deeper I investigated, the more disturbing the pattern became. Dolores kept detailed notebooks documenting every item in her collection, where it came from, when she acquired it, and elaborate justifications for why she needed to keep it. Her house was filled with objects that belonged to other people, all rationalized as temporary protective guardianship, until she could find appropriately deserving new owners. I provide an extremely valuable community service, she insisted during formal questioning at the station. I ensure that precious, irreplaceable objects find appropriate, loving homes rather than being carelessly discarded, damaged, or misused by people who don't understand their true worth. Not everyone in this world deserves to own beautiful, meaningful things. Her monthly yard sales had been happening for over 6 years, but according to neighbor testimonies and her own records, she had never actually sold a single item to anyone. The sales were elaborate psychological performances designed to create social situations where she could control interactions while maintaining possession of other people's property. The psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Patricia Hendricks revealed severe hoarding disorder combined with complex control issues stemming from prolonged social isolation and unprocessed grief. After her husband Ronald died 8 years earlier from complications related to diabetes, Dolores had developed increasingly elaborate justification systems for keeping items that didn't belong to her, convincing herself that she was serving as a protective curator safeguarding valuable objects from unworthy or careless owners. Mrs. Finch demonstrates classic symptoms of someone who has replaced normal social connections with object-based relationships, Dr. Hendricks explained in her report. She's created an elaborate fantasy where she serves as a benevolent guardian protecting precious items, but in reality, she's using other people's possessions as tools for social control and manipulation. The legal resolution proved extraordinarily complex. While Dolores had acquired most items through questionable but not clearly criminal means, borrowing without returning, keeping items left behind, accepting things during emotional moments, her systematic refusal to return borrowed or forgotten objects when requested constituted theft under state law. District Attorney Michael Torres decided to pursue charges for theft by conversion on 12 specific items with clear documentation of ownership and requests for return. However, he also mandated mental health intervention and community service rather than jail time, recognizing that Dolores's behavior stemmed primarily from untreated psychological issues rather than criminal intent. We facilitated the return of over 200 identifiable items to their proper owners throughout the neighborhood. Some objects had been missing for so long that people had completely forgotten about them until seeing them at Dolores's yard sale. I had no idea she still had my grandmother's serving platter, said Janet Kumar, examining a piece of china she'd lent Dolores for a potluck dinner 4 years earlier. I asked about it once, and she got so emotional talking about how it reminded her of community traditions that I felt terrible for bringing it up. I assumed she'd given it away or broken it. The case revealed how social isolation and untreated mental illness can manifest in elaborate schemes that appear harmless on the surface but actually victimize entire communities over extended periods. Dolores's fake yard sales were sophisticated psychological theater designed to create situations where she could control social interactions while maintaining possession of other people's property. Most disturbing was discovering how neighbors had been unconsciously enabling her behavior for years. Rather than recognizing the manipulation patterns, people had been making excuses for her conduct, avoiding confrontation, or doubting their own memories about lending or leaving items. Her elaborate, Emotionally manipulative rationalizations had been so consistent and detailed that many residents questioned whether they were being unreasonable and wanting their possessions returned. Looking back, I can see how she played on everyone's sympathy, reflected Margaret Williams. She'd get teary-eyed talking about her loneliness after Ronald died, or how much an object meant to her, and you'd feel like a horrible person for asking for your own stuff back. She was incredibly skilled at making you feel guilty for wanting what was rightfully yours. The investigation also revealed that several neighbors had suspected something was wrong but hadn't reported it because they didn't want to cause trouble for a grieving widow, or they weren't sure their concerns would be taken seriously by authorities. I knew something was off about those yard sales, admitted Robert Martinez. I'd been to 4 or 5 of them over the years, and she never actually sold anything to anyone. But I figured maybe she was just lonely and wanted company, or maybe she was having second thoughts about getting rid of her husband's belongings. I didn't realize she was systematically keeping other people's property. The fake yard sales stopped immediately after Dolores received court-ordered mental health intervention and supervised property returns. She was required to attend weekly counseling sessions and participate in a community service program designed to help her develop appropriate social connections. However, the case had lasting effects on neighborhood dynamics. Residents reported being more cautious about lending items to neighbors, more assertive about retrieving borrowed possessions, and more aware of manipulation tactics disguised as emotional appeals. It's changed how I think about being neighborly, said Sarah Rodriguez. I still want to help people and be part of a caring community, but I'm much more aware of when someone might be taking advantage of that goodwill. There's a difference between genuine need and systematic manipulation. The case became a training example for patrol officers dealing with unusual neighborhood complaints. What appears to be a simple civil dispute or minor fraud might actually be part of a complex psychological manipulation system that's been operating for years. 6 months later, Dolores moved to an assisted living facility where her collection behaviors could be monitored and redirected into appropriate activities. Her house was sold, and the new owners found additional items belonging to neighbors hidden throughout the basement, attic, and storage areas. The Pinehurst case highlighted how someone can use seemingly normal, even sympathetic activities like yard sales to manipulate social situations and control community dynamics over extended periods. It demonstrated the importance of trusting instincts when something feels wrong about a neighbor's behavior, even when that person appears harmless or pitiable. What disturbs me most about this case is wondering how many other elaborate manipulation schemes are operating in plain sight within residential communities. How many people are using normal social activities as covers for psychological control or property acquisition? How many neighbors are quietly victimizing their communities through systems so sophisticated that victims don't even realize they're being manipulated? The case taught me that some of the most effective predators don't use violence or obvious threats, they use emotional manipulation, social expectations, and community politeness to achieve their goals. Sometimes the most dangerous people are those who appear most vulnerable and sympathetic. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed to collect other people's belongings through elaborate excuses or emotional manipulation? How do you balance being a helpful neighbor with protecting yourself from people who might take advantage of community goodwill? What would you do if you suspected a neighbor was systematically manipulating your entire community? I'm Detective Angela Foster with the Summit Ridge Police Department, and what I discovered at 318 Pine Drive on November 8, 2023, revealed a decades-long mail theft operation that had stolen countless personal moments from an entire community. The case still haunts me because of how many lives were affected by one person's betrayal of trust. The complaint came in around 11 a.m. while I was reviewing case files at the station. Dispatch reported multiple callers claiming someone was selling their personal mail at a yard sale, specifically love letters, family correspondence, and personal documents that had gone missing years or even decades earlier. I drove to the address in my unmarked 2021 Toyota Camry, expecting another neighbor dispute or possible identity theft situation. What I found was far more disturbing and complex than I'd anticipated. The yard sale was set up in the driveway of a modest ranch house belonging to Evelyn Crawford, a woman in her late 60s who'd worked for the U.S. Postal Service for 37 years before retiring 5 years earlier. She had neatly organized tables displaying hundreds of letters, cards, and documents, all sorted by decade and carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. About 15 people were gathered around the tables, but instead of typical yard sale browsing, they were examining items with expressions of shock and recognition. The atmosphere was tense, almost reverent, as people held letters they hadn't seen in decades. "Detective Foster?" A middle-aged woman approached me, clutching a bundle of envelopes. "I'm Patricia Williams. I called this in. This woman is selling love letters my husband wrote to me before we were married in 1987. They disappeared from our mailbox that summer, and we always assumed they were lost by the Postal Service." I examined the letters Patricia was holding. They were addressed to her maiden name at an address on Elm Street, postmarked between June and September 1987. The envelopes showed signs of careful handling and preservation, and the contents were clearly intimate personal correspondence. Evelyn Crawford was a small woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing a cardigan and sensible shoes. She moved methodically between the tables, adjusting items and speaking quietly with customers. When I approached her, she seemed nervous but not entirely surprised to see law enforcement. "Mrs. Crawford, I need to ask you about these letters. Several people are claiming this correspondence belongs to them." "Well, technically, undelivered mail becomes postal property after a certain period," she said defensively. "I was simply preserving historical documents that would otherwise have been destroyed." "Undelivered mail? These letters appear to have been delivered to their intended addresses." That's not entirely accurate. There were delivery issues, forwarding problems, incomplete addresses. I kept them rather than sending them to the dead letter office." As I continued examining the merchandise, the scope of Evelyn's operation became clear. She had systematically collected mail from her postal route over her entire career, creating an archive of personal correspondence that spanned 4 decades. The letters were organized with disturbing precision. Tables were labeled by decade. 1980s love letters, 1990s family correspondence, 2000s personal documents, 2010s holiday cards. Each item was in protective plastic with a small price tag, ranging from $5 for routine correspondence to $50 for what she deemed historically significant pieces. More residents arrived as word spread through social media and phone calls. The Martinez family found Christmas cards from deceased relatives that had never arrived. The Thompson family located letters from their son who'd been deployed overseas in the early 2000s, correspondence they'd waited desperately to receive during his deployment. "These are letters from my mother," said Janet Chin, tears streaming down her face as she held a bundle of envelopes. "She died in 2003, and I never received these last letters she wrote from the hospital. I thought she'd stopped writing because she was too sick." The emotional impact on the community was devastating. People were discovering final communications from deceased loved ones, romantic correspondence that had shaped relationships, and family documents that had influenced major life decisions through their absence. "This letter contains my father's final instructions about his business," said Robert Kumar, examining a certified mail envelope from 1999. "He died 6 months after writing this, and we never received it. We had to guess what he wanted done with the family store, and we made decisions based on incomplete information. I contacted the postal inspector's office and requested immediate backup." Mail theft by postal employees is a federal crime, and the scope of Evelyn's collection suggested systematic criminal activity over decades. While waiting for federal investigators, I interviewed Evelyn more extensively. Her story revealed a complex psychological profile of someone who'd convinced herself that keeping mail was preservation rather than theft. "You have to understand, Detective, so much mail gets lost in the system anyway. I was saving these precious personal communications from being destroyed or ending up in landfills. I created a private archive of local history. But you never delivered them to their intended recipients. Some addresses were unclear, some people had moved, some mail was damaged. Rather than let these beautiful personal writings disappear forever, I preserved them properly. The investigation revealed that Evelyn had been selectively keeping mail throughout her career, focusing on items she considered interesting or historically valuable. She targeted personal letters, family photographs, holiday cards, and documents that revealed intimate details about residents' lives. Her method was sophisticated. She'd identify mail that recipients might not immediately miss: letters from distant relatives, non-urgent personal correspondence, greeting cards, or documents that weren't time-sensitive. She'd mark them as undeliverable in the postal system while actually taking them home for her collection. Postal Inspector Maria Santos arrived with a team of federal investigators. What they discovered in Evelyn's house was staggering: thousands of additional pieces of mail organized in filing cabinets, sorted by family name, address, and content type. This represents one of the most extensive mail theft operations we've encountered, Inspector Santos told me. She created a parallel postal system where she decided which communications were worthy of preservation and which recipients deserved to receive their mail. The psychological evaluation revealed that Evelyn suffered from severe hoarding disorder combined with a God complex regarding information control. She'd convinced herself that she was a curator of local history, preserving important communications that would otherwise be lost. Mrs. Crawford demonstrates classic symptoms of someone who believes they have superior judgment about what information people need or deserve to receive, explained Dr. Michelle Roberts, the forensic psychologist assigned to the case. She replaced the normal postal system with her own decision-making process about which communications were important enough to deliver. The legal consequences were severe. Evelyn was charged with multiple federal crimes including mail theft, obstruction of correspondence, and fraud. The Postal Service estimated that she'd stolen over 15,000 pieces of mail during her career. The community impact extended far beyond the immediate crime. Families discovered that relationship problems, business failures, and personal conflicts had been influenced by communications they never received. Some marriages had suffered because love letters never arrived. Business deals had failed because contracts and agreements were intercepted. My relationship with my sister was damaged for 20 years because I thought she'd stopped writing after our mother died, said Sarah Martinez. I found 12 letters from her that I never received, letters where she was reaching out for support and trying to maintain our relationship. We spent 2 decades thinking the other person didn't care. The yard sale items were confiscated as evidence, but the Postal Service worked to reunite mail with recipients, or their families. However, many items couldn't be returned because recipients had died or moved away, leaving an archive of lost communications with no destination. The case revealed how one person's psychological disorder had affected hundreds of families over 4 decades. Evelyn's preservation had actually destroyed countless relationships and altered the course of people's lives through withheld information. During sentencing, over 60 victims provided impact statements about how missing mail had affected their lives. The judge noted that while Evelyn believed she was preserving history, she'd actually stolen irreplaceable personal moments from families throughout the community. Evelyn received 8 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay restitution, though the emotional damage couldn't be quantified or repaired. The Postal Service implemented additional oversight procedures to prevent similar crimes. 6 months after her arrest, I still received calls from residents who discovered that important mail had never arrived during Evelyn's tenure. The case changed how people in Summit Ridge thought about their postal service and the trust they'd placed in a system they'd assumed was reliable. The investigation taught me that some of the most damaging crimes don't involve violence or obvious theft. They involve the quiet stealing of information and communications that hold families and communities together. Evelyn Crawford had systematically dismantled the social fabric of her community by controlling which messages people received. What disturbs me most is wondering how many other communications were intercepted by people in positions of trust. How many relationships were damaged by letters that never arrived? How many important life decisions were made based on incomplete information because someone else decided what messages we deserved to receive? The case highlighted the vulnerability of communication systems and the trust we place in people who handle our most personal information. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are those who appear most trustworthy and work within systems we depend on daily. Have you ever wondered about mail that never arrived, especially during important periods of your life? How many relationships or opportunities might have been different if certain communications had reached their intended recipients? What would you discover if someone had been keeping letters meant for you over the past 20 years? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.